All right. Where I had us leaving off was discretionlessness.
Never do anything in your spouse's absence that you would not do in the
Okay,
presence. That's
all
the
right.
last thing I have.
Now, I don't think I had a chance to elaborate on that, but I think, though that's to me, and it's not original with me, a profound thought and statement. We didn't speak about some of those areas, but obviously what you do on the internet, what you do with regard to finance, what you do with another person. All of that's covered. If I wouldn't do it with her standing there, then I don't want to do it with her not in my presence. So just a great rule of thumb, and certainly the idea that Christ is always present, regardless of whether we have a spouse or not, is going to govern our actions. Number 3 of the destructive deeds is delay. Oh, how easy it is to fall into this trap. It is the death of your local work. It's the death of your endeavors. Obviously, the cliches go, procrastination is the thief of time and is the work of the devil. Now, here are some practical tips that will help us to avoid this destructive deed. The first thing you've got to do is to learn what your workload is and stick with it. All right, so what does my local work look like? What are my demands from week to week? It's going to include things like an article for the bulletin. It will include, I'll tell you something, I imported something when I came here called Daily Bread. I started doing that in the early 2000s, in the earlier days of email, and it's amazing when you voluntarily do something and you do it consistently, it becomes not a gift, so to speak, it becomes an expectation. So you obligate yourself to that. So now, I'm thankful we had an intern program, and then a second intern that came on, that was Garrett, and then Brett, that really alleviated my workload, because I was writing 5 articles a week in addition to the bulletin. And that requires great time, especially to have any kind of quality. So now I'm only doing 3 a week and have Brett do the other 2. But you obligate yourself. That's part of my workload. I can't go and say, I'm going to blow off Daily Bread today or this week. Can't do it. It's something that has to be done. Visitation. There are certain visits that have to be made in a given week. There are ongoing recurring obligations like Bible studies and counseling sessions. That becomes part of your workload. Right now, I'm visiting some of the delinquent members with the elders in the process of trying to retrieve them. That takes time, especially if you find yourself in an area where your members are spread out. The commute to do these things is something that's a part of your workload. So don't learn what your workload is. And I hadn't even said anything about preparing sermons or Bible classes in that. You see, you learn what it is, and you make sure that you are timely in getting to it. Or you'll become that preacher who's sitting in his bedroom on Saturday night trying to figure out what am I going to preach tomorrow. So you can't delay. Number 2, learn to turn work down. This is hard. If you're conscientious and you want to serve and you love people and you just want to do what you can to help, a lot of times that word no is going to be elusive in your vocabulary, but it can't be. Now, that's not to say you say no to everything. I know people like that. They have no qualms saying no, and they routinely do it. God, I don't believe, can use somebody like that. So there's a balance in between those two. All right, here's some other areas for no delay. In addition to what I've said, devotional life, and some of this may be repeated from what I said a few moments ago if you didn't write it down in your notes. Devotional life, sermon preparation, visitation of the needy, and that covers a wide gamut. So devotional life, sermon prep, visiting the needy, visitation of prospects. You guys have already had Wayne's evangelism class. Did he give you a rule of thumb for how quickly you need to visit those who visit the assembly? There's a conventional wisdom in that statistics kind of back up. They say that if you visit a prospect within 24 hours, the likelihood of their returning to visit you again is somewhere between 75 and 90%.
Wow.
So, because what does that tell them? Now, it's good if you can develop in the local church a program to where it's not just the preacher, because it has an impact. Now, They say, wow, the preacher, because they have their expectation is, wow, this preacher, he's in an ivory tower. I can't believe he came to my house to see me, to thank me personally for visiting there. I didn't even know he knew I was there, maybe, If you get somebody else to go and do that, it helps the church. It helps the community, really, because Joe Blow, the average member of the church, comes and shows up Monday evening on their doorstep and says, hey, don't want to interrupt your day, just want to tell you thank you for being in our services, and hope you'll come back. Here's something I can leave with you to read, tells you more about us. But if you'll do the same thing, 2-3 minutes, go and do that and say, thank you for coming. Don't delay in that. If somebody visited in July and you're just now getting around to them, then it's probably a cold trail. But there was an opportunity that you might have capitalized on. Also, daily duties. And I'll talk more about this when we get to Unit 2. But things like filing bulletins. Guys, I have dropped the ball on that. Now, here's what's happening in that. It gets easier. Church bulletins are kind of going the way of the dinosaurs, at least the printed ones that are mailed out. I'm going to talk about where you get illustrations from, how you can gather information that you can use illustratively in your sermons. I use church bulletins. I've gotten a lot of good stories. Some guy will get from somewhere, or he'll write, or it'll be from his own personal experience, and that's where those come from. When I use illustrations in sermons, I've collected them from somewhere. All right, but you need to have a central place. A lot of that can go on your computer, especially if you get Evernote. You guys, have you been introduced to that? Okay. So that takes it and puts it into a searchable database. But somewhere somehow you've got to use Evernote. That takes time. Don't delay, or you'll have what I have currently in my office. I usually do pretty good, but in the last few months, I've got a stack of papers that I've got to process and get in their place. Don't delay in regards to that. Don't delay in regard to your family and things that need to be done. When you boys are calling you and say, hey, Dad, can you come play ball with us? Well, maybe next week. Well, you keep doing that. That's not good. Goal setting. Don't delay. What are you going to do in local work this year? What are your plans this month? Well, if you aim at nothing, you're sure to hit it. So make sure that you don't delay in goals. All right, so that's a deadly deed that we want to avoid. A fourth one is disorganization. Organize your day. Will your day start the same way? What is your day going to look like? What do you have apportioned in that day for what you're going to do? Organize your week. Again, we've talked about that, the various tasks that you have to get done. Organize your office. Where are your sermons going to be? How's your library going to be organized? And I'll talk about that when I get to the library. But don't just throw them on a shelf. They're no good to you, or they're less good to you if they're just haphazardly placed around the office. Periodicals. If you take the Gospel Advocate or the Gospel Journal or whatever paper it is, the Rocky Mountain Christian, if you keep those and use those, where are they? How do you have them accessed? Organize your office. Organize your automobile. This is something I did when I first started preaching that has proven pretty helpful. And I am no woodworker, and you'd have to be really good with your hands to make it look good in your automobile. But you have a console area, and maybe it's just using the console area. Put tracks in there. Put in your business card. Put in something from the church, like we have the pins that or even the Think Soul button. But put things in there that you can use and disseminate when the opportunity arises. Disorganization is the destructive D that we mentioned. Number 5, directionlessness. Who wants to go to a basketball game without goals? Wouldn't that be strange? Going there, these guys dribbling up and down the court, no goals. And yet men live without them. There are a lot of preachers who have no idea what their goals are, have no concrete objectives in their preaching life. They just float along from week to week. But men with goals are successful. Spiritual. And materially increased. directions in your life. And then finally, discouragement. Mark this down. Sooner or later, I will become discouraged. But two things to keep in mind when that inevitability happens. Discouragement will come, but number one, when it comes, don't doubt your spirituality. You may be tempted to do that. If I were a stronger Christian, if my personal life with God was stronger, I wouldn't be discouraged right now. That's not the Bible talking. And so, first, when it comes, don't doubt your spirituality, your spiritual life. But number two, remember, this too shall pass. I'm going to say more about that, but I just want to give you an example of discouragement from the Old Testament. Obviously, it would come to your mind almost immediately, Elijah. He was a man who had been triumphant up there on Mount Carmel. He had gone to a great victory, but then the next thing you know, he's in the valley of discouragement. He's a prophet of God. He's doing God's work. And thus, there's at least to some extent a parallel between his work and what we do. And God encouraged him. Here's 4 things we know about him, and this is an outline that you can make into a sermon if you'd like. Number 1, he was mistreated by his brethren. We will be mistreated too. Number 1, he was mistreated by his brethren. Number 2, he was physically exhausted. You remember what happens after his great victory? He outruns the chariot, goes a day's journey. I mean, he's just wiped out when he gets to the end of his run. Number 3, he lost faith in his brethren. Didn't he? What did he say?
I'm the only one left. God.
Just me. And they sink my life. Here's something that you need to remember. Jesus had faith in men. So must I. Now, I'm not saying that we put our faith in men instead of in God. But we can find ourselves in discouragement in such a place that we become jaded and we just have no faith in our brethren. And you can tell you're discouraged going, oh, brother, what do you expect? I can't count on anybody. Oh, well, Jesus did. He counted on 12 imperfect men, 11 of whom forsook him in his hour of trial. And yet he had faith in them. And he knew that's going to happen. We don't. Number 4, he entered the statistic business. When he said, I'm the only one. And the difference in the statistic was 1 versus 7,000. He was off by just a hair, wasn't he?
Just slight.
Statistics can very well deceive. Well, where's that going to come into play in your local work? Go ahead.
I said 1 versus how much?
7,000. He thought 1. God said 7,000. When might you be tempted to look at statistics?
Baptisms.
Yeah, how many baptisms? And you look and you say, wow. And I tell you what, you're going to do it. You're going to go, because hopefully you'll never be satisfied with the number of baptisms that you're seeing in your local work. But you look at that and you go, only 5 baptisms.
And then you go, only one's faithful.
Yeah. Oh, see, it's even worse there. You go, 4 of them just, 2 of them walked out the door and never came back.
Yeah.
Oh, what do you do? I remember one time we baptized a lady, and her first name was Vicky, and just a sweet lady. And I remember that morning we had that welcome circle, and we were singing, and everybody embraced her and was just really encouraging her. And we were setting up a follow-up study, and I remember, I can still see her walking out the front door of our church building. And so far as I know, it's been over 10 years ago. That was back in Virginia. From what I've heard, she's never been back.
Wow.
That'll happen more than once. And so we find ourselves saying, and you think about it. And I think about somebody right now that we went through 3 months, baptized them, went through 13 weeks of follow-up. Then there were some marital issues. We went and did marital counseling, and that didn't end well. Not his doing, but his wife's doing. And then there's been continuing studies because he's discouraged. And after all of that, barely hanging on, and maybe will not stay faithful. Despite all the efforts, phone calls from elders, all this time. And what happens is, despite yourself, you get discouraged. You begin to think, wow, all that time spent, is it wasted? That's discouragement talking. All right, so baptisms is one area where you can enter into the statistics business. Where else?
Just hold up.
All right, let's deal with attendance first. Let's say you're preaching for a church of 100. What should you rightfully expect to see on Sunday night?
100.
If you have a service. 100. And 32 come in the door. Tell me you're not going to be discouraged by that. And then you begin to think about how you're going to deal with that, and hopefully you'll see improvements in that at time. But I've never been to the place or known of the place where 100 came on Sunday morning and 100 came back on Sunday night. You take it even out those that are elderly and who are sickly and who can just barely make it out. But there's some who just choose, who have no hindrance but themselves, not to come back. And you'll know that as you know them, that there's just a shallowness in their spirituality. There's a worldliness about them. They're being pulled back to the world, or they just are apathetic, whatever it may be. This inherited faith, and they just come because they've just always come, but they only come on Sunday morning. That's enough, and they checked it off, and they go on their way. It's discouraging. Did you mention another area, or was that the area?
Chris was talking about.
All right, so baptisms, attendance. Are there any other areas where we can enter into the statistics business?
You know how you would do it, but I mean, sometimes when they're not learning what you're teaching them,
Okay.
I don't know how you would.
All right, a quotient of biblical ignorance that remains on
I just taught you that last week.
Yeah. Oh, it's something that Bill mentioned the other night. I've done before. I haven't done it here, and I was planning on doing it not too long from now, but I guess I have to wait a little while. But the tests, I did that in Virginia one time, and it was long enough ago that I put, who plays for the Chicago Bulls, wears number 23. And I mean, even little old ladies knew that, they were writing that. They had a little piece of paper, and so went through and did, who won the Masters. Then I had some stuff from who won Best Actor, and a lot of folks, I try to keep savvy with things in the world, but I wouldn't know some of those things. But anyway, I said, now tally up. There's 10 questions or 20 questions, and then, like we do here, multiply. So everybody's feeling really good. This is fun. This is a sermon, and we're doing this. And then I basic stuff. I said, name one of the 12 spies. Now, a lot of folks would have trouble with 10 of them. Or name 2 apostles. 2 apostles. Matthew, not Matthew, but Peter, Andrew, James, So, or then, what's the 5th book of the New Testament? Closed book test. And it was really telling. Now, thankfully, I didn't ask for it. I don't know if people would give them to me anyway, but I didn't ask for them. But you could tell that people really didn't know their Bible. And you're thinking, you come to church, week after week, and why don't it's discouraging. But that wasn't the intent of it. It was to say we need to be in the book. And I think I recommend preaching a sermon like that because it will convict people that I know this basic stuff in life and I don't know the Bible at this basic level. I need to do something.
That's an excellent illustration.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking basic stuff. But if you do that, don't get the obscure hard stuff. You don't have to. Who wrote Revelation? That could be one of your harder questions, and it'll help people to see their need to study. But you can be discouraged if you can somehow quantify that this knowledge is missing. Ryan, what did you have?
I think maybe a low youth attendance or no youth present at the congregation.
Yes.
Some people get worried if there's no young people, they think of the future.
That's exactly. Do you see the many different areas where you can get into the statistics business and get discouraged as a result of that? How about how many people are active and involved in the works of the church? See, these are areas. How many members are in the congregation who can sit down and do a Bible study with a lost person? Now, all of that's changeable. All of that can show progress. You have to be patient. But I'll tell you, it can be discouraging. Let me tell you this. This is very important. Never make a big decision in the valleys. Never make a big decision on a blue day. For example, let's say you're going through that and you're going, man, I just had that sermon and they didn't even know who Cain's brother was or who the first woman, was. Oh, man, we only had 32 last night and 100 yesterday morning. Hey, can't anybody do a Bible study here except me? And then the phone rings, and this church in Timbuktu calls and says, hey, we'd like you to come be our preacher. And now, look at your frame of mind. Oh, man, this work is just dragging me down. And so, you go, this is an escape. This is a sign from the Lord. Oh, okay, yeah, I'm coming. I don't even have to try out. Just sign me up. And you get there, and there's 10 times the problem. Don't make a big decision on Blue Day. You know, we'll talk about ending a work and beginning a work. You know what I think is the best time to transition? It's when things are going very well in a work. Where the brethren love you, where you're doing productive work, and you find yourself ready for a different challenge. Now, there's always a risk. You're leaving the known for the unknown. But when you're in the midst, let's say there's a potential split, or there's a significant church problem, or you're in the midst of a big discouragement, the brethren, and I understand there's a lot of factors there, but if possible, the brethren need you. The Lord needs you with His people there. It's not a good time to leave that work. If you care about the church, you go somewhere else. You leave them with that mess, then you really, that can almost even approach the character issue side of things. Be careful about that. And you usually don't make good decisions when you make them in despair and discouragement. A New Testament example of discouragement, we'll just look at it very briefly, was John the Baptist. He was in prison for his work for God. Remember what he said? He said to his disciples, are you the one? Or do we wait for another? Yeah. Now, I think Jesus' response helps me. Did Jesus go, man, you're being ridiculous. You know what? That's crazy. He encourages him gently. And, you know, He does the same for us. As we appeal to His Word, our Lord has so many promises that we can cling to when we're discouraged. Is the life in preaching, and am I making a difference? Am I impacting people? I get up there and preach week after week. Are people making any changes? And the Lord promises His Word doesn't return to Him void. And I guarantee you, you get through that discouragement, and you look objectively, or have somebody help you look objectively, and you'll see the changes, the differences that you're making. If you're faithfully preaching God's Word, and you're throwing your heart into the work, it's difficult not to see positive changes taking place. They'll occur, but you can't see them as well when you're discouraged. So that's all I got to say on that. Any comments or questions before we leave that behind? All right. Well, let's talk a little bit before we move into our next unit about the preacher's wife. Now, what you see up there is I have a little bit of introductory material. That's point number 1 under the preacher's wife. We're going to talk about her role. So if you want to go ahead and set it up that way. And while you do, just some food for thought. Mrs. Noah was a preacher's wife. Aquila was a preacher's wife. Peter's wife was a preacher's wife. And perhaps all the apostles besides Paul had a wife, based on what he says in 1 Corinthians 9:5. And so, if that's the case, they were preachers' wives. As we think about and introduce ourselves to the preacher's wife, we need to remember these things. She is often in the shadows. She's often taking the back seat and playing the second fiddle. In fact, if she's not in the shadows, if she's not taking the back seat, and if she is playing first chair, it may cause trouble for her husband in the local work. She's often in the shadow of other women in the congregation. If she projects herself too much, she's misjudged and misunderstood. She'll spend some lonesome hours alone while her husband is engaged in work. Remember, we talked about that she can be a part of it, but there's sometimes she can't be. There are sensitive situations that come along where Maybe it has to do with an elders preacher's meeting. She's not going to be there. And he may hear things or deal with things that are going on in the congregation or even between himself and the elders that she has to just sit in the dark and not know about. She's the one who cares for the children during the worship services. You know, that's a disadvantage because at least if you're in the pulpit, there's 30 minutes or so where she's having to do all that by herself. And I remember Kathy said that Kathy's always chosen to sit up front. I think there's some wisdom in that. It's third opinions. It has nothing to do with what she could sit in the back row if she wanted to. That's fine. We always had our kids up front, and there were sometimes she looked like a mother hen with the little chicks going out, you know, because especially when we had 3, she'd go out with one of them, and the other 2 just came following along. Well, I remember one Sunday I was preaching on parenting, of course. I mean, that's the kiss of death right there. So I'm preaching on parenting, and one of the kids had a problem. I think it was maybe the youngest one. It was Carl. And so Kathy takes Carl and dashes out of the auditorium kind of quickly, and just assuming that Gary and Dale were going to follow. And as it often is, in the front of the congregation, there's not a big crowd of folks up there, so they were on the second row. And so they were on this side, as I was facing them, right down there by themselves, the 2 of them. And there was somebody on the other end of the pew, but the pew was long enough that there was probably 10 feet of a gap there. And then, you know, the nearest other folks were over here. All the youth sat on this side. And so here's Gary and Dale right here. Kathy's out with Carl. So I'm preaching along, and guess what they begin to do? They're cutting up. They're laughing, talking, having a good old time. And so, you know, as you do as a preacher, I'm over there, I'm trying to catch their eye, and I'm trying to preach, you know. When you're preaching, 100 things can go through your mind all at once, you know. And I'm going, well, are you people not seeing what I'm seeing? Will somebody please go over there and reprimand my kid? Because I have no problem with that. If my kid's misbehaving, reprimand them, you know. But nobody, I don't want to, you know, don't want to discipline somebody else's kid. So anyway, they're over there by themselves. And so finally, you have to go to level 2 force, you know. And so I go, isn't that right, boys? And then everything grinds to a halt. Everybody looks over at them, and they look up. But then they look around, and everybody's going, you know, they're smiling, oh, isn't that cute? No, it's not cute, but anyway. So they thought they were the celebrities of the day, so they start cutting up and hamming even more, so I had to bring the sermon to an end pretty quick. But, of course, that's what's going to happen. But Kathy has that load all by herself, week in and week out. Preacher's wife will bear that burden when your kids are small. Now, some of you, the kids are a little older, and that's not as big a deal. Mariah, you're there, well, that's exactly the case. She's also the one who has to tear up housekeeping, damage furniture, discard her curtains and appliances, and cannot make long-term household routes if her husband must move elsewhere. Sometimes we can prepare them for that with our previous careers, and that becomes something that's easily adjusted to. But every time it happens, no matter how often you do it, you go through that process. Because women are more nesters. They tend to that's their world, and they want to make it what they can really rally around. All right, and with these moves also come adjustments. Depending on your decision making for children, that means new schools, new friends, new neighborhoods, and the same thing for herself. Uprooting and making new friends, dealing with a new school, dealing with a new neighborhood. Now, I'm here to tell you, again, maybe this is something I learned as a preacher's kid. That's not catastrophic. In fact, I think it can be an advantage. I'm not saying you move every 6 months, but if you have to move a few times, it's not going to devastate you. It's not going to hurt you. It teaches you resilience. It teaches you to get outside of your own comfort zone and to make friends. Don't wait for others to come to you. But there is an aspect of that that's a burden. All right, she also spends many hours in counseling, listening, and hospitality, Bible class teaching, and organizing church functions. And that without pay. Well, I understand. It's your salary collectively. But it's that 2 for the price of 1, you know. And so there are expectations. There are some pressures that she can face. So we want to spend some time talking about her and her work and her role. So number 1, let's deal with her role. And let me just kind of check in. I haven't done it in a while. Have I been going a little fast this morning? Okay. All right. Okay. If I need to speed up, let me know. If I need to slow down, let me know. All right. What's her role? Number 1, she's a wife. And as such, her husband is her priority. That's what I'm saying that. And usually, that's how she'll feel. That's what she'll want to do. Number 2, she's a mother. Sometimes her children will take precedence over church work. I'll tell you, here's an example of this. And this is a judgment call. And this congregation is wonderful in so many respects, and here's one of them. Kathy has traditionally been very heavily involved in ladies' Bible class. But we homeschooled. We made that decision. And as a result of that, Tuesday morning is a school day. Now, what she's done periodically is we've had like Thursday evening Bible classes, the ladies' Bible class, a second one for ladies who work during the day. And so she's been involved in that. But her children, she's made a decision, and she's let anybody that's ever asked know that that's a priority. I need to take care of that. Everybody understands. If you're otherwise actively involved, they understand that sometimes your children are going to affect what you can do to be involved. Sometimes she cannot say yes. Depending on stage of life, number 3, she's a grandmother. She needs time to babysit. Nest empty does not mean life empty, especially if the kids are local. Number 4, she is a leader of women, a leader among women. If there's a ladies' day, she'll often be looked to take a leading role. She'll be tapped to teach a Bible class. Now, she needs to know where her comfort level lies. Kathy's kind of odd in this way in that she prefers to teach women and teenagers over little small children. But a lot of preachers' wives prefer the smaller classes. And if that's where their niche is, that's where they gravitate toward. But she'll be involved in that way. She is a listener and a confidant. Guys, this is very individual. I don't know your wives to the level, certainly, that you do. So you know, only you know, if she is able to keep a confidence. If she is good about avoiding the sin of gossip, then what a great asset you have. To be able to and you'll be very selective on this. If somebody comes in, let's say the regular song leader comes in and confesses that he's struggling mightily with pornography, and maybe in the details of that you come out and feel like you need to wash your hands, you don't go home and tell her that, because she has to be led by him in worship every week. But there'll be some situations where you'll say, "Oh, I just found out this couple is struggling with their marriage." You have the right kind of wife. That'll stay with her and won't go anywhere. She won't rationalize and say, "Well, I'm just going to tell my best friend. I won't tell anybody else." Just tell just one person. Because you know that's how it spreads. Because one person will tell one person, and one person will tell one person, and pretty soon everybody knows it. So if you have a woman as a wife who can be trusted, oh, what a great blessing it is to be able to unburden at times on her. She listens with interest. She listens to young mothers. I'll tell you, so often young mothers having children and trying to get through an assembly, they need that confidence that says, even though I didn't get a thing out of worship, I was doing good by being here because I was training my children. This is where you need to be. Older preachers' wives are going to follow Titus 2, 3 through 5. to teach the younger women in all those important regards, to love their husbands, to love their children, to be keepers at home, etc. and so forth. Number next, she is a comforter. She comforts divorcees who are reeling from the hurt of that. Obviously, I have in mind there the female divorcees. Probably not smart to do otherwise. And we have to be careful of that ourselves, by the way. Those who lose their husbands. As a comforter, she will develop the grace of writing notes, sending cards, making calls, and visits. And she's also an encourager. Chiefly, she encourages her husband. Now, I don't know where else I have this in my notes, but I don't mind telling you that we have a system. You don't have to have a system, but Kathy and I have a system. It's been tested at times, because if you're going to have a system to rate your sermons, you need to have thick skin. If you want to know how you did, then you need to be prepared to hear that you didn't hit a home run that Sunday. But our system is 1 to 5. All right? So when I get through preaching, and I truly believe that she's listening as a listener, as a worshiper, and not just to rate my sermons, but I trust her more than anybody else. 100 people can pass by me and tell me I did a great job that day. I don't care. I mean, I do care. I appreciate it. But what I'm waiting on is what she has to say. And so sometimes I sit at the pew. She'll flash me a number. Sometimes we get outside of the car. We'll talk about it, and she'll tell me. We try to not do it real, overtly so that the boys are knowing what's going on, but they know through the years. And so I'll tell you, it's golden. When I feel like I've really prepared and I've preached well, and she flashes me the 5. I'm like, oh, yeah. Oh, it went well. Now, I may have preached to one before. She's never told me. See, she's an encourager. She's gonna at least try to find something well in that, I don't remember a 2, but I'm sure I have. But really, the dreaded 3, I almost fall apart. And what'll happen, and sometimes with a 4, I want to debate it out. I want to say, I say, well, why did I get a 4? And then she'll tell me, and I want to try to justify it. You know what she always says? If you don't want me to do this, I'll just tell you 5. So it puts me in my place, and I understand that. But I get encouraged by that. That's just a little small part of the entire life that she'll do that, and it just really puts wind in my sails. Kathy will encourage me when sometimes I'm sure it is far from deserved. But that's what a preacher's wife does. She encourages her husband. She encourages her children. She's not constantly needling them and criticizing them and giving them the impression they can't do anything right. She encourages them. She encourages the young ladies and the elderly. She encourages the weary and the distraught. But she's also, finally, in her role, an example and a role model in all those different roles that she wears. She is a role model in her clothing. Let me tell you what I mean by that. She can be fashionable. She needs to be modest. That's true of any Christian woman. Certainly we realize everybody will, from time to time, be looking her way. She's going to be a role model in her child rearing. That doesn't mean she's going to have perfect children. And it doesn't mean that she does her child rearing just from the aspect of being concerned about what the brethren think. Remember, what I say I stand by. We raise our children to behave the way they are because they're in the Christian home, not in a preacher's home. Ever, never, not once. But because they do what's right, because it's right. But she's going to be a role model in that. She's going to be consistent. She's going to be a disciplinarian. And she's an example and a role model in her attitude. All right, let's talk about her. All right, let me see if I missed it here somewhere. I'm sorry, guys. Somehow I've got a little short unit in here that I'm going to go slower with this because this is important. It's not in my PowerPoint for some reason. What are her qualities? The preacher's wife's qualities. I'm going to give you about 7 of these. Number 1, she's hospitable. You know, the house may not be perfect. It may not be the largest, the nicest in the congregation. Maybe a good piece from that. She still opens her home. You know what I found? The first preacher's home that we owned, the first house we owned, the family, was a little Cape Cod. And I don't know if you have ever owned one or seen one, but a Cape Cod is basically all bedrooms. So this house had about 1,100 square feet. We had a bedroom, or maybe 2 downstairs and 2 upstairs, and there's really the living room was very small. The dining room was very small, and we had as many as 20, 25 people over when we were doing the alphabet thing. And what we found in this very modest looking house, nobody cares. Nobody gets hung up. When we had the Christmas caroling, especially the first few years, first time we did it, we had 94 people in our house. And even though the house is bigger, I don't care how big the house is, it's hard to comfortably fit 94 people. And it's not the prettiest, nicest house, but it's adequate. Nobody cares. Nobody cares that your carpet has a stain here and there. If you tried your best to make it look presentable. Nobody cares about how modern or old the appliances are. If you open up your home, that's what matters to you. She's hospitable. Number 2, she's sociable. That means she's going to go to showers and dinners. She does not draw up in her shell and refuse to attend. You might remember I mentioned that preacher who would stay in his house till 1 minute till, would go into his office till 1 minute till, and would go out, and how ineffective that made his work and ineffectual. Same with a preacher's wife. If she is always in that shell, it's going to be very difficult for her to help her husband be effective. She doesn't find herself frequently saying, all women don't go, so I'm not going. All of us, whether men or women, in that ministry situation have to overcome our introvertedness. Number 3, she's impartial. So she's hospitable, she's sociable, she's impartial. Even though she has close friends, and should have close friends, in my opinion, she's as quick to help one member as another. To be warm and friendly, and to engage, and to not pass up interaction with anybody. Number 4, she's warm. Here's what I mean by that. She's not unfriendly. She's not cold. She's not unapproachable, and she's not withdrawn.
What is number 4?
This is number 4. So she's hospitable, she's sociable, she's impartial, and she's number 4, she's warm. Now this means she can hold her head up and she can look people in the eye. Now, guys, we have a lot to do with how confident our wives are. Just like I said, my wife encourages me. That works 2 ways. We need to make sure we're always encouraged, that we frequently find ourselves encouraging, that we don't see ourselves as the supervisor of the home who's there to point out all the things that are going wrong. A preacher's wife has a uniquely challenging life, and so we need to encourage her so that she feels better about herself. But I don't know if you've ever seen a preacher's wife like I'm talking about, that very timid, very shy, retiring, and barely can look at somebody, and that's going to materially affect the work. Now, I look at all of you guys who are married, your wives, you don't have that problem. You have wives who are able to engage and to relate and to be involved. But you know, the things that happen in local work make it necessary for you to continue to encourage them so that they can continue on. But they're going to get, like all of us, and whatever we do, there's going to come a time when you get hurt. So you've got to be able to recover from that. People are going to say something they shouldn't have said. Number 5, she's resilient. She's resilient. R-E-S-I-L-I-E-N-T, I think. She keeps bouncing back, if you put it that way. She's got stick-to-itiveness. Thus, when criticized, she commends. When hurt, she smiles. When she's knocked down, she gets up. She doesn't say to her husband, well, let's just quit. This is too hard. We're not appreciated. Let me give you an example. I want to be very careful. And I certainly never want to project that we always do these things right. And I'll try to give you examples of things we've done wrong. One time, not too long ago, my wife heard from one of the kids that one of the members had taken him aside and had said, be careful about the thoughts you put in my kid's head. And that particular boy said, what are you talking about? So, oh, never mind, I shouldn't say anything about it anyway. Well, got in the car on the way home, and he said something to Kathy about that. Said, so-and-so pulled me aside and said that, and didn't say what it was, so I don't know what it was. Now, Mother Hen, those feathers are up, but she prayed about it first. But you know what she did? She got on the phone. And she called up that other person. And now, how did she handle it? Did she fly off the handle? That's what she wanted to do. She wanted to really, and it turns out it was like a third generation thing. It was some other, the kids who were directly involved, it was just a really silly thing. It was, you take dry ice and salt or something like that, and if you leave it on the hand too long, it burns or something. And so this son was talking to a friend and was saying that's what happens. If you put dry ice on your hand and salt, it makes it feel tingly and funny. But if you leave it on it too long, it'll burn. It can even bleed. So they're having a conversation. 2 other kids heard that, and what'd they do? They went and tried it. They were fine. No problem whatsoever. Their mamas were like, oh yeah, that's cute, But there was another kid who heard about those 2 kids. And that kid's mother is the one that pulled him aside. And it had been like months before. Now, I only paint that scenario that specifically because here you are as mama and you hear that. What do you want to do?
Punch him in the face.
It's like, come on. How far removed? Yeah, exactly. How far removed from the situation can you be and then stick your nose in something that's not your business, and that's not right? Especially, and I can say, that those kids aren't always the best behaved. But my wife, we had a policy ever since we've been married, has nothing to do with preaching, is we don't tell others how to raise their kids. We don't really, we want to know if our kids are doing something wrong, but don't sit us down and tell us how to raise our kids. We'll have a good agreement that way. And it's worked beautifully for over 20 years. We've had kids that long, but we've been married that long. So she calls, and even though she doesn't like to confront, it was a pleasant conversation. And she could not say, well, let me tell you what your kids have done 100,000 times. But instead she goes, I just want to be clear. But she didn't let her off the hook. She's like, oh, well, I shouldn't have said anything. I really shouldn't have done it. And she kept trying to, but, can't believe he'd tell you that. Well, of course he would tell us that. So she's not going to retaliate in kind, because as Christians we don't. We look at Jesus, 1 Peter 2:21-24. When he was reviled, he reviled not again. When he suffered, he threatened not, but committed himself to him who judges righteously. Now that's what we're going to do, because 21 says that we have an example in him. So she's going to be faced with those kind of situations, and she can't retaliate in kind. But she'll do a lot of good when she responds with kindness in the face of something like that. She's like Paul, the preacher's wife is. What does he say in 2 Corinthians 4:8-10? We are hard pressed on every side but not crushed, perplexed but not in despair, persecuted but not abandoned, struck down but not destroyed. And so she can retaliate, she can rebound from that kind of thing. She's resilient. Number, 6? She's trustworthy. People are going to come to her with their confidences. And over a period of time, they will know whether they can count on her or not. I don't know what causes us, people, to want to share those kinds of things. But we need to be the kind of person that can take something and let it, many times, go through our ears and out of our minds. And certainly not let it go off of our lips. Wendell Winkler is a name I mentioned to you guys from time to time, but he was the head of the Bible department at Faulkner University when I was a student there, was a mentor for me. I remember I had him come and hold a seminar for us right after I got into local work. And I won't be specific, but I had done something that was known to the campus that was not right. And I felt really bad about that. I tried to repent the best I could. But, you think about your teacher, and you don't want them to think ill of you. So he came in to hold the meeting, and I pulled him in my office after Bible class one morning. I said, Winkler, I just got to tell you this. I don't know if you knew this or not, but I blah, 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 blah. I'll never forget what he said. He said, I think I may have heard something about that, but I've forgotten about it until you told me. That's what we need to be. That's what our wives need to be. Those who can take and hear the faults and the shortcomings of others and let them pass through and not continue to hold that in our thoughts about that person. She's trustworthy. Number 7, she's neat and orderly. In her home and in her appearance.
Repeat.
She is neat and orderly in her home and in her appearance.
What if they're a slob, though?
Well, let me tell you what will happen. Somebody's going to pop into the house, and I guess what you can do is just barricade yourself in and hide. That's not the best solution.
Right.
Now, I'm not to say that everything's to the nines and everything's, always perfectly dusted and all that. But again, there should not be a 3-foot swath of stuff all over the floor, all over the house. Patience is needed, but that's an important quality or area to have to work on. And it's the truth that there are cases where that happens. And it's probably above my pay grade to talk about how that happens and what all you do about that, but it's important. And there needs to be cooperation. Guys, we play a part in that. Even if our wife stays at home and we work full time, we can pitch in and help. But we need to encourage that. Just see the importance. If people do drop by frequently, and be prepared for that. I'm sorry, that's an inadequate answer, but
Oh, it's the answer I was looking for.
Okay.
Maybe not other folks looking for.
All right. Well, it has to improve. It can impact. I'm not saying that it's a make or break necessarily in a local work, but it is a factor.
It's amazing how these are wonderful qualities, but it's amazing to me how her husband or the preacher still has a great deal of influence on her in these areas.
That's true. I do believe that we can't oversell that. A woman's self-image is determined in great part by her husband. A woman's sense of self-worth is guided by her husband's behavior toward her and his his compliment of her work. So that's a great point, Charles. It really is. All right, let's deal with the preacher's relationship to the husband. What is her relationship? What is her relationship to him? We'll deal with a few things here. Number one, she is his encourager. Occasionally, he'll come home hurting and crushed from some meeting. And I don't know what your constitution is, but depending on the situation, the gravity of it, if you find out that an elder with whom you're particularly close has terminal cancer, or somebody that you studied with and you thought that was so promising, and then they just reject the gospel, there are going to be things, I believe, in your local work that will make you cry. But she can say a few reassuring words and make it better. Number two, she is his trusted critic and advisor. Back to what we were talking about a while ago. She'll tell him after a sermon sometimes, that was a bit too harsh. Guys, be ready for that and accept it. It's kind of like a silent partner in a Bible study. She can see things you can't always see. And you may not feel like you were being harsh. You may not have intended to be harsh. But you may come across as so hard, it's valuable to have a wife who will tell you, and who you have the grace to allow her to tell you, that was too harsh. You weren't kind in your demeanor. Or your sermon was too long. Or I didn't understand the points you made there. Don't be like I have been before and go, well, hon, let me tell you why. Or 15 people told me they liked that sermon. Well, okay. Well, then you just go ahead and take your guidance from those 15 people from now on. She's a trusted critic. Because he knows that she has his best interest at heart. Number three, she is his confidant. He can unreservedly discuss anything with her. Yes, sir.
I find it sometimes pretty interesting that you would hear some wives speak about their best friend, and you'd be willing to hear it's their husband, and it is not. And I always find that interesting, because I know your best friend is somebody you share basically everything with. So I don't know. I've never been able to understand that.
And this points out something. This is the first time I've not issued the invitation ahead of time, and I feel badly about this, because I feel like this would. Usually, I've invited all the preachers' wives to be here, and a good many of them have showed up for this particular class, because it's very helpful. I mean, what are you guys going to do? Leave your computer open and have the notes out to this section so that she can accidentally find it out? Or are you going to discuss, hey, I want you to hear what I learned in class today? It would have been better just say, hey, go to the whatever this RSS feed, but I don't think they're up yet. I don't know if you're recording or whatever, but this information she needs to have, and you can just blame me. See, you're completely innocent to say it's Neal's fault. He's the one that taught this. But I think a good rule of thumb is what's off limits to what a wife, any wife, should say to her best friend. It's my opinion. I'm not talking about physical abuse. I'm not talking about anything extreme like that. But I think that it's a very dangerous ground to use a friendship to talk about what all's wrong with the husband. I think the opposite's true, although men don't do that. But and maybe it's hard for me to say that with legitimacy, that men don't sit around and go, let me tell you about all the things that are wrong with my wife. Or my wife doesn't do this for me or that, And we just don't do that. We say, Ravens or Patriots, that's kind of how we do. Maybe we get a little bit more personal, that we don't do what wives or women do. But Dariah, I think it's a bad idea to use a friendship to vent about the problem. Because every woman's married to an imperfect man. Every man's married to an imperfect woman. And I don't think it ever helps. It's kind of like that idea, People say, don't repress your you need to have a vent. You need to vent. You need to, that's an outlet just to be able to vent. We know what venting does. It practices, letting out anger that shouldn't be let out. Maybe you go out to a field and yell somewhere, but when you explode, you just make yourself more prone to explode. When you share the things that you feel like your spouse is doing that's not right, you just really set up a pattern, and what are you focusing on? So I don't think that's the wisest thing to do. That's just from my own opinion, but I'd be very interested to hear a counter-argument with regard to that.
That's a worldly practice.
It is. I don't know how many people have come to me for marital counseling because one of the spouses, husband or wife, they go and they talk about their marital problems with their friends at work. And you know what those friends are going to tell them? Just ditch them.
Yeah.
You need to think about yourself. And you set yourself up for that kind of advice because that girlfriend wants to be sympathetic. And certainly, hearing one side of the story, whose side is she going to be on? She's going to be on the wife's side. She doesn't realize the part the wife has played in that situation. There's something I was going to mention with regard to that, but that's okay. With regard to being confident, the things that he will not tell her are things that he doesn't tell her to protect her or to keep her from being hurt. I'll give you an example. A preacher friend of mine was involved in a situation where there were some teenagers involved in a relationship that had turned homosexual and involved in the local work. And that preacher didn't tell his wife. The wife knew something wasn't right. But he said to her, I just want to keep you safe. If I don't tell you anything, then nobody, you can legitimately say, I don't know. And that turned out to be a very wise course of action because something like that in the local work is just volatility waiting to happen. That's just all it needs is the pressure cooker lid removed. Number 4, she's his sounding board. Lesson ideas. You're working on something, you're really excited about it. You can pick her up, pick up the phone or text her or something and say, "Hun, here's what I'm thinking about," and she'll be a sounding board. It's wonderful to have that. And maybe it's a uniqueness of being in the life of preaching that you can contact your spouse about something that's relative to your work, very relevant, and have her say, "Yeah, I think that's good," or "What about this?" Or, "Hey, have you thought about that?" And don't dismiss that. That's a great resource. Program ideas. Ask for her objective reaction to them. Because what she'll do is she'll help you fine-tune them. She might have that one little piece that makes it go from good to excellent. So she's a sounding board. But also underline this, or however you bold it in your text, she's a member of the team. They visit. They counsel. Study. Travel. And pray together. Guys, I'm not in any way intruding into your personal lives, but may I recommend that you faithfully, daily, pray together. It's a huge difference in the peace of mind and the sense of well-being that you have in your local life. I can't think of anything more intimate and wonderful that you can do together than to approach the very throne of God as a team. All right, some suggestions for her. Now, you see 2 main points there, but I've got some development under each one of those. The first thing that she must do is learn how to handle criticism. Okay, so what is a preacher's wife potentially going to face as a criticism? What might she be criticized for?
It could be
Child rearing?
her hair, how she's dressed.
Appearance. Okay. Her dress, her appearance, her cooking.
Whoa.
Her,
Not possible.
that's what I say. Sometimes we're blessed not to have that as an issue, but it can happen to some wives. Children. Her husband. kind of wife you have, but many wives, that's the hardest, is to hear her husband criticized. Her discipline techniques, too harsh. Not harsh enough. You're too indulgent. Her work ethic, all of that will be subject to scrutiny. That's not to say that she's going to get bombarded with all of these, but there are areas in which she might, at times, be criticized. And this is helpful to remember. The only way to avoid criticism, you know it, right? Say nothing, do nothing, be nothing. So it's going to happen. And here's what will help her, is to know this. To remember that the Lord, the prophets, the forerunner, and Paul were mercilessly criticized. So she's in good company. The Lord, the prophets, the forerunner, Paul were all mercilessly criticized. I think that'll help you remember that. She needs to learn to evaluate the criticisms. To learn to adapt and to grow from them, to take them with a grain of salt. You know, I have found that when my critics criticize me, almost always there's something to be learned. I mean, I think, like we all do, I've faced unjust criticism. But even in that, there's something that I can glean from it. And maybe some adjustment that I need to make. Number 4, this will help her to know as she handles criticism that to keep in mind who she's serving. Keep in mind. If you're convinced that you're pleasing Him, then all is well. What's Paul say? For we serve the Lord Christ. Colossians 3:23. So you do your work not for men, but for Him. Number 5, remember, it's normal to be hurt. But hurt is temporary. So what does that suggest? I can't bear a grudge. I can't hold on to this for months and years at a time. I've got to let it go, or it'll eat me up on the inside. I think it's number 6. Be sure it's a criticism.
Sure.
Be sure it's a criticism. Is it a criticism? Maybe I misinterpreted that. Maybe I was a little sensitive to it. We've got to avoid and conquer paranoia. I know a preacher who there's a conspiracy behind every truth. I mean, every member, there's some agenda, there's some hidden, issue there, or there's some undermining or whatever. And you can imagine how happy that preacher is. Very rare. I don't know many people like that, but that guy, it's amazing to me that he sees something foul afoot about everything. Got to avoid and conquer paranoia. Not everybody's sitting around thinking ill of you. Don't interpret every word and action suspiciously. What do they mean by that? What are they trying to say? Don't become defensive. You see, this leads to manufacturing of imagined criticisms. We can begin to think people are being critical when they're not at all. And then number 7, conquer criticism yourself. There's an old adage that says we often detest in others what we see in them that reflect our own faults. A lot of times people who are indignant about something are such because they see a mirror in front of them. So conquer criticism yourself. Number 8, conquer self-pity. Number 9, don't be thin-skinned. You've got to develop some calluses in that regard to criticism to be in ministry. mean, that's probably true in just about any industry or profession that you can think of. Number 10, build your own self-esteem and confidence. Don't let it be tied to others' views and words toward you. There's more, but I'll leave it at that. The other thing that our suggestions for her are to learn time management. 9 principles in regard to this, very briefly, that we'll deal with. So we're leaving criticism altogether. None of this is in any way tied to criticism, but how she, through time management, can be productive in that work as your wife in the local work. Number 1, evaluate demands and give priority to the important. She can't be on every committee. She can't be involved in every project. The larger the congregation, or the more busy the congregation, the more important it is for her to prioritize. Evaluate demands and give priority to the important. Number 2, plan time for self. Guys, you can give your wife a great gift. If you will sometimes say, and you do your work well, you're productive in your local work, nobody is going to have any kind of qualms or gripe about you saying, if you need to let somebody know, if it's a secretary, an elder, a member, whoever it is. So I'm taking the afternoon off today. I'm going to go and watch the kids, or go pick the kids up from school or whatever. And I'm going to let my wife go wherever, to the coffee shop, to go to the store. I'm going to, I've saved aside, I'm going to give her some money and to say, hun, do not buy anything for anybody else, nothing practical, just go out and just, get something for yourself. Get something nice, something really nice, go out there and do that. And let her have a little mini 3-hour, 4-hour vacation. That's important. And that will pay such huge dividends. Plan time for self. She needs to learn that. Number 3, mixed activities. This is something I'm going to talk to you guys about in time management. Let's just say it's grocery store day. You know what she can do? Sister Smith is in the nursing home. It's right on the way. So she'll go and stop by there 5-10 minutes and visit with her, see how she's doing, get in her car, go back on her way. What's she done? She's been productive. It helps you in local work, but it was right on her way. Number 5, learn how to get on and off the telephone and the text and Facebook and email. A lot of time gets wasted. Hours, if we're not careful. Number 6, conquer assignments to keep them from piling up. Number 7, I feel pretty convicted about this one, guys, and I know this is in the realm of expediency and judgment. But don't allow kids to be raised in an atmosphere of frenzy. I don't know another way to put that. And I'll illustrate it. Maybe that will help you. But don't allow your kids to be raised in an atmosphere of frenzy. There's a phenomenon that has happened in the last generation or so, and I don't know what's happened. I don't know if any of you guys played sports. I played basketball and football when I was in high school. And I was involved in some club activities. I was in the Y Club and some other things. And I was involved in student government. But I don't remember it being so consuming. I don't know when we crossed this line. And I know a lot of parents struggle with this. They have their kids in this activity and that. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 activities, and it's all year long. And they're running from one place to the other. I remember the few years that our boys played football, and they're 2 years apart. And so when you play football and there's that diversity of age, you're on 3 different teams. And so you have the midget and the minors and the flag football. And so they may all practice at the same field, but then as you get closer to the end of the season, they have more elaborate practices. And then there's the game schedule. You may have them here, and you have to call on a third person to say, I need you to take our kid to this particular game because we just can't physically do it. It's frenetic, and it's 3 or 4 months of just nonstop. And if we're not careful, we can build a lifestyle. So 18 years go by, and we just have them running here and there and yonder. I personally don't know that that's healthy. Maybe simpler is better. Because I remember practices. I remember right after school we would practice for an hour or two, and I remember some nighttime practices. And I don't remember it being as consuming as it seems to be these days. And I think it can be negative in its impact if we allow those things to dominate in the family life. We need to have time for devotions, game nights, to be together as a family. I think that's undersold. In the long run, you do learn some great things from like organized sports. You learn character, you learn team, you learn unselfishness. But we don't need to let all that be learned in that frenetic environment where we don't have time together as a family. So I'm off my soapbox now. I really think that's an important thing for us to consider.
Well, it brings to an all-new life the song, Take Time to Be Holy.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Because sometimes we have not allowed ourselves as a family any moment. You know, and no wonder that meditation's almost a lost art. I don't mean that weird yoga stuff. I just mean biblical meditation, where we just sit there and reflect, and we're not always, and that kind of goes to that. We got to have noise always going around. And I have to work on that, guys, because I love music of all different types. I like that to go on. But I even like my fan running at night. I like, but we've got to have time for that quietness between ourselves and God, and as a family, to have that peace and solitude. Number 8, don't accept every invitation and assignment. Same things that apply to us. So these are some things. I have no idea how you disseminate this information. You might even think it's worth passing along, but those are things that can help her in that role in the preacher's wife. Now, here's one thing I want to get to before we leave this particular unit. Here are some suggestions for us, the preacher. Keep in mind with our wives. I'll give you a moment to kind of write down these main points, and we'll just talk about it a little bit. Number 1, keep in mind that you are her preacher. That's so easy to forget. And what will happen is that she'll want to ask you a question, a Bible question, or maybe for some guidance. And we've got to be careful that we don't have patience and tolerance and time for average member, of the church. And then when she wants to know something that puzzles her, we don't have this impatience that says, you already know that. I don't have time for this. You are her preacher. You think about that? I mean, that's who she hears week by week. That's her resource. But she lives with you too, which is humbling, but you've got to provide that role for her as well. She looks to you for a model. I think we take that to heart, boy. That'll keep us humble. Number 2, another suggestion is to remember that she has feelings. She's not Superwoman. She'll be hurt. She'll be confused on a personal level and on a ministry level, and she'll cry. Be her rock in this matter. Give her support. And don't minimize her hurt. In this regard, do not let her suffer alone. She has feelings. 3, give her assurance. Make sure she knows that you stand with her and that you stand by her. She needs to know that you need her and you appreciate her. She's important. Number 4, encourage her to maintain her individuality. She doesn't have to give up who she is because she becomes a preacher's wife. You can think about, you can build a list of these wonderful qualities that make up your wife. She gets to keep those when she goes into ministry. Her sense of humor, her interests, her personality. Number 5, listen to her. You know God told Abraham to listen to Sarah? I think it's advice that's good for us too. Listen to her ideas. Listen to her suggestions. Number 6, spend time with her. 1 Peter 3:7 is for preachers too. Dwell with her in knowledge. One preacher says, I always reserve Saturday night for family. That's ridiculous. Saturday night, that's it? That's all you give your family? No, we've got to do better than that. We've got to spend time with her. We need to go on dates with our wives. Good resolution. I don't know which resolution is. I know it's difficult. I know things like budget, things like demands of school. There are always going to be demands. Take time in that regard. You know, I think of a situation, I know it's very extreme, but I saw what can happen when a man doesn't do that sort of thing. I was, among others, including my wife, who was helping a lady who's a preacher's wife. And her husband basically had nothing, did not have her included in anything he did in ministry. And did not spend very much time with her at all. She was a shell of the person that she might have been otherwise. We've got to spend time with our wives. Number next, provide her with some leisure time. That's something we've already mentioned. Keep the kids so she can go somewhere. Number 8, help her grow. We'll talk about some of the things that you can ask for of the congregation when you're when there's, what if you want to call it, the contract phase of it or the working agreement. But they'll usually let you go to a lectureship or a workshop or some kind of thing like that where you can get away from local work and learn and grow, if at all possible. Even if you have to save up, take her with you. Because she benefits from that. She'll grow. It'll stimulate her mind and her thinking. It'll give her ideas as well. All right, any questions about that? Let me just give you this. I'm going to say very little about it. Just a kind of a reinforcement. The preacher's relationship to his wife. Love your wife. Now, this is something as you're typing down. I do this in counseling, and I don't know where else this comes into play in this class. Can you guys at all see this board? If I write over here, I'll try to write in such a way as you can see it. But I do this in premarital counseling, but it's something that's effective for us to consider too. I talk about love. The definition of love, we remember from 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8, all the different qualities. And as I go through that, I say, this is what love is. Love is patient. Love is kind. Then I go to 1 John 4 in verse 8. Anybody remember what that passage says? He that loves not knows not God. For what? For God is love. All right, so I can legitimately come to this passage and I can say, all right, if God is love, there's only 3 statements in the Bible so far as I know that tell us that God equals something. All right, John 4:24, God is spirit. God equals spirit. That's his nature. 1 John 1:5, God is light. Okay, that's who he is. 1 John 1:5, he equals light. 1 John 4:8, God equals love. So, when I think of love, I'm thinking about God because God is love. So I can go back to this list, can I, and say, God is patient. God is kind. And that's going to describe God because God is love. All right, I think it's John 14:23 where Jesus says, he who has seen me has what? Seen the Father. All right, so Jesus says, if you want to know what God the Father is like, look at me. All right, so if Jesus reflects the Father, I can go back to 1 Corinthians 13 and do no violence to the text, right? And say that Jesus is patient. Jesus is kind. Jesus does not take account of wrongdoings. Jesus never fails, etc. All right, but what am I? I'm a Christian, right? What's a Christian? A Christian's a follower of Christ. 1 Peter 2:21, he has given us an example that we should follow in his steps. All right, so I can go back to 1 Corinthians 13, and that passage, I can put in the name Christian for Christ, because Christian's a follower of Christ, so a Christian is patient, a Christian is kind in the ideal, and that should hold true. Now, I'm a Christian. So what does that mean? That means I should be able to go back to 1 Corinthians 13, and I can say, I am patient. I am kind. I bear all things, believe all things. Now, here's what you have. You have a lifelong project. Because I'm never going to do any of those things perfectly. But there's my beacon, there's my guide. That's what I'm working toward, is being those things. So as I consider my relationship as the preacher to my wife, I'm going to follow the example of God and Christ and the Christian. Colossians 3:19. Husbands, love your wives and do not be embittered against them. Number 2, assume your headship of her. And you know the whole thing about submission, right? It doesn't spell inferiority. That God did not take Eve from the head of man so as to rule over him. Didn't take her from the foot of man so that she could be under his foot. He took her from his side so that they could be partners. That's our relationship. But there's a position that each of us have in the home. And God has made us most responsible. He's made us the leader of the home. Number 3, put your wife first in your life. Even before parents and before friends. Number 4, provide for her. 1 Timothy 5 and verse 8. If anyone provides not for his own, he's denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. Number 5, protect and defend her. Number 6, don't deprive her. You know, somebody say, well, that doesn't even make sense. All I can tell you is 1 Corinthians 7:3-5, Paul addresses the husband and the wife. Now, I don't know if it's stress and pressure from work, if it's the familiarity you might have with your spouse, if there's unresolved issues. There are a lot of things that can stand between you and an intimate, healthy relationship with your wife physically. But you've got a responsibility in this regard. And certainly she does as well. Number 7, make her feel secure. Your wife should always feel loved. Number 8, never become unfaithful to her. I know that's a duh, but it happens quite frequently. Number 9, we've already mentioned that principle of absence and presence. Next, trust her. Trust your wife. Number 11, be good to her. Elkanah was so described as the one that was good to his wife Hannah. Number 12, continue courting her. I don't know of another term, just keep wooing her. You know, what you did to win her, do to keep her. Number 13, commend her. 1 Peter 3:7, honor her. We can say a lot more. There we go. Honor her and be considerate to her. Listen to her. Be sweet and tender to her. value and appreciate her. Proverbs 12 and verse 4. Number 19, pray for her. That's something that get missed in our prayer life. Not even necessarily her as a mother, not even only her as your wife, but pray for her and the things that she struggles with. I don't know. I don't know how we quantify that. I don't know how spouses do in praying for their spouse. Not judgmentally and not God straighten out all the things that's wrong with my spouse. Not that kind of thing, but praying, please be with her. Help her with the things she struggles with that I might not even know about. Number 20, make her happy. Now, half of that's on her. But do your half. Help her get to heaven. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 16. And then share life with her. 1 Peter 3, 7. I don't know, guys. I don't know. Wives are so individual in this, but you know, your wife likes to do certain things, right? Here's what my wife does for me. She goes to Rockies games with me. I get a little baseball package ticket, cheap as dirt, but it's every home game on Tuesday home game during the season. And so once or twice, I'll take her with me. She taught me she has fun, and ballpark has kind of a fun atmosphere, but I know she doesn't like sports. She's learned some things about it for me. That's what I do for her. I mean, that's what she does for me. But what does your wife like to do? What does she enjoy? What's her interest? Now, my wife loves the spice shop. She loves all things cooking. She loves that spice shop in Littleton. You guys ever been in the spice shop? Oh, man. You go in there and it's just rows of just jars of spices. Now, when you go to a spice shop, let me tell you, you don't just go in there. You go in there and they have these little testers, so you can take it out and you pour it in your hand and you're supposed to, wet your tongue and you're not supposed to just do it. You're supposed to go, oh, yeah, oh, that's subtle nuance there. That's way over my head, but she's doing it, so I'm watching and I'm doing it. No, that salt's a little too salty, whatever it is. But you go all the way to that store, and it smells nice. Well, and you don't do that, and you're like, you done yet? You just might as well stay at home. You've blown it. You engage in that activity. You find what she likes to do, whatever it is, and you engage yourself, and you do it. And you might, along the way, even learn to like it a little bit, enjoy some aspect of it. But that's what we do together in our life. Find what her interests are. I never thought. Now, some guys like it. And then it's no statement against them that they do like it. Some very manly men like it. But my wife likes to watch the Food Network. I'd rather watch ESPN. But sometimes I'll go in there surprised and I'll say, honey, you want to watch the Food Network?
How could you not like chop?
Huh?
How could you not like
Oh,
chop?
I do like chop. Yeah, I've learned a lot of that.
That's
Now, if it wasn't for
food.
family,
It's the best of both worlds.
You're right. It is good.
Go eat bacon.
Or next Food Network star. So I've learned to like some things. But I didn't know it, except for I knew that was her interest, and I sat down and I watched it. So whatever it is that your wife likes to do, enjoy those things together. Whether, I love to hike. I don't know that that's Kathy's first love, but she'll do it because it allows us to be together. Anyway, you can go on and on about that. Oh, I'll tell you, we were in Buford, Georgia. I was holding a gospel meeting, and there was an arboretum or something, some kind of state-run flower. The University of Georgia had a flower garden, and so we went in there. And it's pretty, and I like to see them. But, going from plant to plant, looking at the tag and seeing what it is and seeing where it came from and feeling on over the flowers and buds, that's just not my thing naturally. But it's what you do, you see. And that's our obligation, our responsibility, and our joy to do that together. Well, that's all I'm going to say. And I've worked you guys pretty hard this first time. I'm going to give you a little extra time. There's classes still going on, so be aware of that. We're going to go a completely different direction after chapel. So let's go ahead and cut out, and I'll see you at after chapel. Ryan, you want to try to do a little?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit.
I'm going to give you that. You guys can be free to do what you like. We've got
a couple of units. Basically, it divides into three parts, and I don't know how you have it in your syllabus. We're going to deal with discouragement, we're going to deal with burnout, and then stress in the ministry. We're just going to deal with that, and then we're going to move into the preacher's professional life. A lot of this will be just to make us aware of an aspect that can happen in life, in preaching. It's not more prominent in preaching, but in as much as we lean on the Bible as our resource and our rock and everything, we are blessed that we can go to Scripture and find out how to deal with some of the peculiar things that can distress us in this life. I don't know if you guys are how long you've been watching football. If you have any interest in that, I remember there's two brothers that kicked in the NFL, the Grammatica brothers, Martine and Bill. I don't know if you remember, several years ago, Bill Grammatica was lining up last second to kick a field goal. He had been an All-Pro, and so for a kicker, I mean, they're all pretty accurate these days. He must have been having a great season. And he kicked a pretty long field goal, last play of the game. And he was jumping up and down. And it's one of the biggest bonehead things of all time. He tore his ACL celebrating after kicking a game-winning field goal. And you imagine how you feel. That's millions of dollars on that leg, you know, and to make that kind of a mistake. The ticker report said, Bill forever will be entrenched on blooper reels as the kicker who blew out a knee celebrating the field goal. And I wrote an article which I called that a Grammatica error. So, sometimes we can have good intentions. We can try to do the right thing, and our plans backfire on us. And other times we can get hurt in the process of doing something nice for others. And maybe sometimes we have honorable intentions and we just really foul things up. Sometimes we can be tempted to think, why bother? That can be when we find ourselves going down the road of discouragement. I want us to think about, in this life of preaching, what are some things that can bring about discouragement in our ministry lives? And there are several things that can cause us to be discouraged that I want us to consider. The first thing that can cause us discouragement are mistakes and failings on our part. We can be discouraged because of our own humanity. It may be personal struggles. I don't know what you struggle with personally at the deepest level of your spirituality, but you have them. All of us do. And those very things can be the source of our discouragement in trying to serve others. Because we get up and we preach the ideal. We preach what God expects, what God's will is, knowing full well that there are going to be times when we preach on things that we ourselves struggle with. And the effect that can have on us is discouragement. If you have a problem with your attitude or your temper, and you get up and you preach on anger, you feel discouraged at your own shortcomings in that area. Or maybe it's lust. Or maybe it's some other sin or failing. It may be a stupid mistake on your part. I don't know if it was in chapel I've mentioned this, but the one that always comes to my mind was when I was trying to get sermon note sheets out or something. There's something I was trying to print out for my class, and the copier wasn't working. It had been just fritzing several times, and so I was aggravated. And it's the same kind of a copier we have here that has the top feeder on top and it has the drop-down lid. And so, you know, what is every man, most men, you know, what's the basic tool in your repertoire to fix something? So, well, it's too high. I'm not that flexible. So I just took my fist and I hit that thing. Oh, yeah, that's going to fix it. Cracked it.
You watch too much Happy Days.
Oh, yes, exactly. And that ain't a cheap fix. That night, as it would turn out, was the elders' meeting. And I had to go in, because you can't hide it, you know, not that I would want to, but it's out there. And so I had to go in there and say, I was thinking, I can't afford to fix this thing. What am I going to do? So I said, guys, I am so sorry.
I was aggravated with the copier today, and I hit it. I broke it. And, it's usually this way. I'm not telling you if you ever do this, it's going to work out this way, but they said, oh, that's all right. We understand. We have it under contract. And it turned out it didn't even cost them a penny. But still it was wrong, and I understand that it cost somebody something. But that was discouraging, and I just thought, why can't I have a better control of myself that I didn't do that? It's discouragement. Maybe it's a bad judgment call on the lesson or sermon that you're preaching. Maybe you said the wrong thing. Maybe you were unkind. And this is a judgment again. I did something not long ago, and you might have been present, that I won't ever do again. Even though some people said, I'm glad you did and I appreciate it, I feel like it was a bad judgment call. In about 21 years of preaching, I have never asked for an amen. But I did that on that Sunday morning. And I was in the passion of preaching that sermon, and I said something like, can I get an amen or something like that? And to me,
You said that?
I did. You must not have been here that morning. But I thought better of it afterwards. And it may have gone flat. My kids and my wife would tease me about it, begging for an amen. But it happens sometimes. Getting into an altercation with a member, perhaps in the view of another. And yeah, I'll tell you, it happened here. We're talking about me as a congregation. I had someone, and it's typical of that person's life, they get drawn into a lot of conflict with a lot of people. And this individual had some criticisms and called, and it's as long as I've been here, I've periodically had to go through that with that person. And in trying to defend the truth, my voice was raised. And so far as I know, all that heard it was Mita, maybe Brett. Hopefully none of you guys were walking by. And I don't think anything I said was wrong, but I raised my voice. And it's hard to know when anger is righteous and when it's not righteous. But the comment was, wow, I've never heard you do that before. And that was to me an indication I made a mistake. And so I apologized to him on the phone, but I apologized to him. That can cause you to be discouraged because you make mistakes. You fail in areas, and others will see it. Number two, it may be from the actions or the inactions of others. It may be brethren not supporting efforts or attending services as they ought. I remember I told you about I think we were in this classroom over here about the door knocking, and I believe you, I believe in you, you'll be here, and then they weren't. That can be discouraging. Meaning-cutting remarks or being ignored by members. I had a preacher friend give me a call and was saying that his kids were being ignored by a couple of the families there in the congregation where they were. Well, that's minor and insignificant, but at the moment for him, it was a discouragement. It may be our spouse or children being mistreated. Well, think about it, guys, as we look at the first century church. It could be the opposition by some governmental agency or the media or denominations. What happens if the government makes it illegal for us to preach on homosexuality being a sin? Are we going to stop preaching it? And if we don't, we may face opposition. They certainly did in the first century. You may have read the classified ad that said, for sale, Hope Chest, nearly new, half price. Long story. Disappointment can happen in life, but life will be continuing for us. I love the old song that says, there's no disappointment in heaven, no weariness, sorrow, or pain, no hearts that are bleeding and broken, no song with a minor refrain. We're not there yet, so disappointments and discouragements happen here. Number three, sometimes you can become discouraged and depressed and not even know why. You should be aware of that fact. One of these days, if you were to just step back and you were anybody else looking at the work where you were in, you might see that you have a great relationship with the elders or the leaders of the church, that there aren't any significant problems. You are financially not under any kind of strain. You have a good home life situation. Every aspect of your life seems to be going like it should. And yet you feel discouraged. I want to submit to you that's a natural reaction. Sometimes It'll hit you out of the blue. You don't even know why. Number 4, it may be personal or home problems. We are Romans. If you cut us, we will bleed. We preachers are men. And if we have struggles in our marriage, or if we're having struggles with our children, we're not immune from that affecting our work. It may be congregational changes. What are some changes in a church that may cause you to experience discouragement? What are some things that can happen in the local church that changes that can, as a net effect, bring you discouragement?
Division.
Okay, there may be a division in the congregation. And that's going to be discouraging to see brothers and sisters that ought to love one another who are at odds with one another. What else?
Death of someone that's one of your hardest workers or
Absolutely.
best encouragers.
And you preach long enough, you stay at a place long enough, you will have those kinds of funerals, those kinds of things that happen. And I try to think of several folks that have been very vital have passed here, but Warren Wilcox, the name that you've heard, you see his books upstairs, but even the nature of how he passed. It was in May, he was walking around doing fine, went and did a workshop, felt a little dizzy. On the way home from that, and asked Carolyn to drive home. He preached for us in our Future Preacher Training Camp the second week in June, and we were at his funeral in September. He had a condition that I can't remember the name of it, but it is akin to, in its effects, to mad cow disease. I mean, it was very quick, it was degenerative, and he lost his motor skills and functions, and he was gone. And he was such a force in our Bible school program. He was such a force with the youth in this area. The greatest singles ministry that this area has known for decades, Warren was at the helm of that. He was such a great teacher in the school. Several of us had to take on a greater workload because he was teaching 11 classes in the school. You think, somebody like that, their passing leaves a great void in the congregation. Oh, incidentally, one of the greatest song leaders I've ever known. Just a 5-tool person. Did the dinner for 8. They were our partners in that, and we have families over, very hospitable, warm, and you feel that effect. And it's discouraging when somebody like that passes along. What other congregational changes can cause discouragement? Division, death.
Apostasy.
All right, a false teaching that crops up in the congregation, and it does. It can. Now, how does that happen? Sometimes it's a new family that has a lot of charisma, a lot of influence. Maybe they're well placed in the community, and they come in and just very subtly they begin to plant these seeds. Maybe have people over to their homes, and quietly those things begin to form. And it can be discouraging to you. We're just trying to do what's right, and try to welcome them, and yet not allow wolves and their influence to spread. New problem people placing membership. I heard the joke about, I can't remember exactly how it goes, but we had all these families that came. One congregation said, we had the best giver came and placed membership with us last month. It's wonderful that, that this change has happened in our local work. And this other preacher from another area congregation said, we have the most talented song leader we've ever had placed membership with us last week. Things are on the rise. And another one said, we got our best Bible class teacher, very eloquent voice. Fourth guy said, that sounds great, but the 3 biggest problem families we had went to go to other congregations in the area. So, it's all your frame of mind. A new family comes and, this is great. Maybe they bring with a problem. Maybe there was a reason they left the last place where they were. It may be families moving away. Same as Chris mentioned with death. It may be an addition of a man to the eldership whose qualifications are questionable. Elijah complained of being mistreated by his brethren in 1 Kings 19. So it could be congregational changes. It may be physical exhaustion, as we mentioned with Elijah in 1 Kings 19. Maybe a loss of faith in our brethren. And as we had said earlier, we may enter into the statistics business. So how do you fight discouragement? I'm going to give you several suggestions. The first one's not up there. The first one is to serve others. When you're discouraged, serve others. What can you do when you're discouraged? You can do yard work with an elderly member.
Visit a shut-in. Find an older member that you can encourage. Clarence Hall was a plumber, and his vision, I guess it was macular degeneration, began to set in. And, Clarence, for a lot of men, our identity is tied into our career. And so as Clarence had this taken away from him, he felt like less of a man. And it's pretty scary. Clarence lost the ability to see colors, and so he's still driving a truck. And he didn't know when the light turned green. Didn't know that I was on the same highway with him. But what he would do is he'd just watch everybody else. When all the other cars started going, he would go. And somehow he was able to miss the doctor's appointment because he knew as soon as an eye doctor saw him, he couldn't conscientiously clear him and he could stay working. And so finally that happened. Well, Clarence liked this little burger joint down from his house. And, he piddled around the house as much as he could, but he's still a relatively young guy in his 60s. So too young to be at home for the rest of his life. So every once in a while I'd go and pick him up and go to this burger. Mayo's was the name of the place. And blue cheeseburger. First time I ever had blue cheese on a hamburger. And I didn't think I liked it, but it was pretty good. And we'd sit there and we'd visit and we'd talk about everything, his children and his hobbies and all those kinds of things. And there were times when I was discouraged, and that helped me. In fact, that's how it started, was I was kind of discouraged. And I sought out Clarence. So you serve others. Number 2, you encourage others. And let me give you some avenues, some areas, some people that you can encourage that will help you when you're discouraged. Encourage the young.
I think that works both ways. I think they encourage you.
That's exactly right. And I want you to see that in all of this. You pick out these different demographics of the congregation, and you encourage them. The net effect is that it will lift you out of your discouragement. But that's right. Maybe volunteer to teach a class. Maybe even instead of junior high and senior high, maybe you volunteer to teach the second and third graders, for a quarter. Take reinforcements and, whatever else you might need. But go in there and teach, and it will encourage you. Get them involved. Have a Pew Packers class or something in which you can interact with them and feed off of their energy. Pay attention to them. As we had mentioned earlier, shake their hand and call them by name and compliment them on some good thing that they've done. Encourage the elderly. In this youth culture, the elderly are being ignored. You can minister to a neglected segment of the population. They get easily discouraged. They're lonely. They maybe are sick and they're physically not what they used to be. Number 3, encourage the sick. In your congregation where you go to serve and work, they're going to be chronically ill people. They're going to be handicapped people. Visit them. Call them. When I first moved to Cold Harbor, there was a lady by the name of Alma Brown. And Alma had MS. And by the time I knew her, she was in a bed. She couldn't walk. Occasionally, she would be able to she had a lift. And that lift would get her out of the bed into a wheelchair. And it was an extended situation. I went with one of our deacons, who was later one of our elders. We had a Tuesday night Bible study. So I would go with him. We'd wait for her. Her nurse would lift her out of the bed and into the chair. She'd go under the table and we'd study some Bible subject, whatever it was. We'd take her back. We'd sing with her, pray with her. She was the most upbeat, sweet-spirited lady. One time, one of the nurses, in trying to get her out of those metal lift beds, I don't know if you've ever seen them before, she got her leg, as she was getting out, she got her leg stuck in that bar. Broke her finger. And I can imagine, that's the most painful bone in the body to break, and she had that broken. Never once complained about that. Her health was going down the whole time, and we'd go and study with her. And I'll tell you, I never left, but that my spirits weren't lifted. You'll have all those kinds of opportunities with people who struggle. You guys may not know Hannah Duke. I don't know, now she's Hannah Lee, but you know Pooh, his daughter. That's how they first started coming here, because their kids were sick and had to go to Children's Hospital because they were renowned in children's rheumatoid arthritis over at Presbyterian St. Luke's. And so she'd come here and she had to go through. I remember the day we baptized her here at Bear Valley. She's a Tennessee girl.
But they came out here so much. At the time, she was having to use oxygen. And she had to remove her oxygen tube to be baptized. And she always had some kind of something attached out of her or something for a long time. But she was so positive and upbeat. And to visit with her, lift the spirits. See, guys, discouragement is something that's unpredictable and that happens from time to time, but these are the very ways that we lift ourselves out of it by encouraging people who themselves are struggling. Encourage the new Christian. You need to pay attention to them and help them to grow. They're a neglected demographic. Wrote an article for the Gospel Advocate several years ago entitled, "When the Water Dries, What?" And you paint the scenario of what happens in a hospital if a baby is born and they're left in the newborn unit. Can you imagine? They don't change their diapers. They don't feed them. They don't bathe them. They just let them sit in there. That hospital would be sued. Yet as the church, what do? The baptistry, we bring them out of the baptistry, we just leave them on the steps just to make it on their own. We can encourage them. Encourage the new member. You know what it's like to be in a new place. You can't hear it. You're in a new place. Practice the golden rule. Seek them out and encourage them because you know what they're dealing with. Encourage the overlooked. Who is that? It's the faithful, dependable Christian who doesn't have a squeaky wheel. They're steady. They're quiet. And they don't expect anybody to say anything to them. But you can encourage them. And they may be one of those in the minority category of a congregation. A minority. A divorcee. Maybe that divorce takes place while they're there, and maybe through no fault of their own, and people are used to relating to a couple or a family, and now it's just a single person. And so they're just kind of off to themselves. Empty nesters, that's a struggle. The unemployed, the silent soldier, so many overlooked people in the congregation. And encourage the visitor. Who knows what's going on with them and why they're reaching out? When somebody drops in the building, there's a reason why. Very rarely is it somebody just haphazardly says, I just don't know what to do with myself on 10:15 on Sunday morning. I think I'll drop into this church building and attend. No, there's something in the background that's going on that makes them say, I need the Lord. I need a change in my life. There's a problem I'm dealing with that I can't deal with on my own. Discouragement and depression can make pleasant speech almost impossible. But if you force your mouth to say good things to the people around you, it will help you. Proverbs 12:25 says, anxiety in a man's heart weighs it down, but a good word makes it glad. As Scott said, there's a direct correlation between our encouraging others and overcoming our own discouragement. I can't even fully explain it, but God just has us wired that way. Who hasn't heard somebody say, I went to visit somebody to encourage them and I came away encouraged? I believe you get a bigger payback than even the one being visited. Number 3, and I didn't bring it, I may bring it on Thursday. Keep a record of past encouragements. Guys, in my office, it's something that I don't even try to organize. I have now, because I've been preaching so long, I've got 2 huge bucket files. They're called my encouragement files. And here's what I put in there. Usually, especially the local work, a kid will come up to me every once in a while and have a drawing. Y'all, did you guys get to know Anton Fredrickson? You older guys? Was Anton?
I know him.
You know him? Okay, he's the guy in Craig. If any of you guys went on campaign in Craig, he's the preacher up there. Well, Anton's daughter, I think it's Madison or Maddie, she, 3 or 4 times while he was in school, she came up after church services, and she had drawn a picture. And it was a picture of me. And it was funny, more than once the caption was, my second favorite preacher. And I said, that's exactly what I need to be. Because, Daddy's number 1. But to be number 2 on this little, I don't know, 3rd grader's list was really just flattering to me. And so she'd write, Mr. Pollard, man of God, or something like that. I have those in my file. If I preach till I'm 85, I'm going to keep that. Or a little kid that, I can't believe it, her name just left my mind. the littlest Balvin girl. I just can't think of it because I'm trying to right now. She wrote on her paper. Her dad's not a preacher, so I guess it's okay. Mr. Neal, the best preacher in the world. And she wrote that on there, and she put her name on it, and I keep that. So when I'm discouraged, I'll pull that out. But I've had letters in my bucket file from preachers who, for no reason at all, in other places would write me, back in the old days before we used email, but I've printed off the emails too, and they said, I appreciated your article you wrote. Cards that members will see where they say, we're so glad you're our preacher. You'll get those. Keep them. Because there's going to be times when you're facing criticism or discouragement and you just don't feel appreciated. Pull them out and revisit them. I do that from time to time when I'm discouraged. Number 4, remember why you do what you do. I had that in my notes. Phil was right on target. You are a servant of people, but you are foremost a servant of God. That's why you're in ministry. It's about people. First and foremost, you're there to serve God. I love what Paul says in Ephesians 6. With good will, render service as to the Lord and not to man, knowing that whatever good thing each one does, this he will receive back from the brethren, right? No, from the Lord. That's why we do what we do. That's Ephesians 6, 7, and 8. Number 5, resist the urge to complain. It's going to be natural and easy to do that. Somebody may invite you to do that. But be careful to keep on the sunny side. I don't mean be fake and superficial. Don't be the guy that no matter what's going on, is just quick to say, oh, things are fantastic, wonderful, not a problem, or whatever. No, but there's always something to complain about. There's always something that we can praise God about. Number 6, to help with the question, well, then what do we do when we are discouraged? Find a mentor or a friend. Speak to him about your difficulties. You need an outlet. But don't just do it to dump on him. Give perspective. You need to find somebody who will be honest with you and will tell you, well, that really is not that big a deal. Or, yeah, that's a problem. You need to do this or that or whatever. Instead of complaining, ask him how he would handle a certain situation. What would you do if you found your elder was an alcoholic? I never faced it, but something like that. Maybe he could guide you. Maybe he could help you with something. But also, be sure to follow up when you're feeling better. Have a positive conversation with him. And thank him for the time he was there for you. There's nowhere that this fits anywhere, but just to say it. Make sure that you form friends with preachers. You guys have a built-in network right here. And I hope that you'll follow up when you graduate and go your separate ways, and will touch base to encourage each other. Because you know that each other will understand what you're going through. You've been in the trenches together for anywhere from 1.5 years to 2 years in this classroom. So you have guys who understand and know what you've been through, and they'll know what ministry is about. Number 7, reinvigorate yourself. What do you do when you're discouraged? Start a new program or revive an old one. You probably, when you're discouraged, can be able to look at something and say, we need to get this going again. How about a visitation program? Those things are hard to keep going. Maybe you can reinvest yourself. Or an evangelism program. A couple of years ago, we did an interactive evangelism 102. And it was in this classroom. We'd role play. At a table out here, we'd have the one that led the study, the silent partner, and then the prospect. And sometimes I'd feed the prospect, some difficult scenarios, some questions, some doozies, and let the class see that. And then we'd break into little groups and let them practice. That was a great way for them to get comfortable with a Bible study with no pressure of a soul being lost or won. But you go get into a situation, there's probably not a well-developed evangelistic program where you go. And you're discouraged. In a time of discouragement, instead of just feeding that, Pour that energy into, let's have an evangelism program, whatever it is. That's just a couple of examples. Start a book project. Or write a series of articles. Maybe you wanted to study some aspect of church history, and you can write a book on it. That'll be 6-9 months of periodic, an hour here, an hour there of working on that, and then it can reinvigorate you. Take graduate courses, or enroll in classes down at a community college or at a technical school. Maybe you'd like to be a woodworker, so you take some classes in the evening, just to kind of reinvigorate you, to stimulate your mind. Number 8, rest a while. Sometimes discouragement comes from being in a rut and even working too hard. You may feel like you're at everybody's beck and call. You may feel bound by the demands of local work. That's when you need to remember what Jesus told the disciples in Mark 6:31. He said, "Come away by yourselves to a secluded place and rest a while. For there were many people coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat." Can you imagine being that bound by the demands of the work that you're doing, that you have to fight to sit down to eat a meal? What did Jesus do? Did he say, suck it up and just keep plowing through? You'll toughen up doing this? No. Jesus was sensitive to what they were dealing with. He said, come apart and rest a while. Sometimes that's what's needed to overcome that rut. Number 9, pray. Well, they say 7 days without prayer makes 1 week. W-E-A-K. That's right. So often we find ourselves trying to do God's work without God's help. So we need to pray. I think that helps a lot with discouragement. Jesus calls on us to bring our burdens to God. Number 10, don't give up hope. Solomon says in Proverbs 13:12, deferred hope makes a heart sick. What I like to remind myself is that Jesus hasn't given up hope in me, so I won't give up hope either. And if anybody should give up on us and has a right to give up on us, it would be Jesus. And if he hasn't, and I can look at Jesus, and I can see an example of one who didn't give up, even when he struggled. When he fed the thousands with 5 loaves and 2 fish, they went away. Jesus could have given up, but he didn't. And if he didn't give up on them, those disciples, he won't give up on us. Number 11, trust that there's a way with God. When it seems that life may be coming apart at the seams, remember that God is in control. Psalm 140, verse 12 says, I know the Lord will maintain the cause of the afflicted. I know it. There's no doubt about it. In Proverbs 12:13, Solomon said that the righteous will come through trouble. These are promises as sure as the cross, as sure as heaven, as sure as all spiritual blessings are found in Christ, that God will carry us through that trouble. Number 12, remember that suffering and discouragement are common to the faithful of God. We cannot expect freedom from sorrow, but we can expect fellowship and encouragement from one another. What you'll find is that you'll have brethren who are sympathetic, brethren who will shed tears with you, and you'll find comfort that helps from God's Word. The poet Robert Burns said, a few seem favorites of fate, and pleasure's lap caressed. Yet think not all the rich and great are likewise truly blessed. But oh, what crowds in every land, all wretched and forlorn, through weary life this lesson learned, that man was made to mourn. It happens. We're in the vale of tears now. Heaven's where the tears are wiped away. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 10, therefore, talking about his thorn in the flesh, I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties for Christ's sake. Why? For when I'm weak, then I'm strong. He took his weaknesses and made it his strength. He turned his liabilities into assets. He took those stones of trial and suffering, and he built an indestructible house of character. F.W. Robertson said, as the tree is fertilized by its own broken branches and fallen leaves and grows out of its own decay, so men and nations are bettered and improved by trial and refined out of broken hopes and blighted expectations. I'm not trying to suggest to you guys that discouragement is a perpetual curse of ministry, but you will be discouraged. And it can be handled if we understand that it comes, but also understand that it goes, and what we can do to facilitate that. And once we come through that, what we can do to minister to others having done that. See, life is made rich by experiences. You think about the wisdom that you're able to share with others. Is it not often born from your own mistakes and your own heartaches and your own difficulties through which you've gone? See, God uses that to help you to be a fuller, better minister of others. That's all I'm going to say on discouragement. Any questions or comments, clarifications needed? Yes, sir.
You mentioned something about Paul when you just read. He took his witnesses and made them his strength, and he took somewhere along that line.
Talking about Paul?
Yeah.
He turned his liabilities into assets?
Okay.
I just said he took the stones of trial and suffering and he built an indestructible character with it. So sometimes the things that seem to be a negative, we can build into something positive. All right. Let me just introduce something here briefly this morning, and then we'll work through that. We may get to Unit 2 come Thursday. I'm trying to, do you guys, we have next week, and then we have the research week, right? Okay. What tentatively we'll probably do is have our midterm a week from Thursday, which means we'll spend some time next Tuesday dealing with the review for that. Also, when we come back on the 12th, the first day that we have class after the break, Michael Sharp is going to come in and talk about the preacher in finance. And so some of that time's going to be spent with him. That's a highlight for the quarter. I think you're going to really look forward to that. I think it'll be very helpful to you as you go into this unique phase of ministry. But let's talk a little bit about burnout. And to do that, that's point number one. I want to do a little introductory material. I basically want to define this. And I want to give you the time to write this down because I think it's very important. Two definitions of burnout. Definition number one. Burnout is exhaustion of physical and psychological resources caused by excessive striving or unrealistic expectations imposed by self or others. I'll read that again. Burnout is exhaustion of physical and psychological resources caused by excessive striving for unrealistic expectations imposed by self or others. What are the extraordinary words in that definition that separate burnout from normal stress and just the issues of life? Excessive. Because we're going to strive for expectations. So we're talking about an inordinate amount of striving.
What else? Unrealistic. How do you meet an unrealistic expectation?
You can't.
Not easily, if at all. All right, number 2, second definition. Progressive deterioration in work and other performances resulting from increasing difficulties in coping with high or continual job stress. Again, progressive deterioration in work and other performances resulting from increasing difficulties in coping with high or continual job stress. All right, what are some of our key words that separate this from routine struggles?
High or continual job stress.
Okay, all right, it's unrelenting. It continues. It's at a level that's high and it's continual. And that kind of ties back to that first word of the definition.
Yes.
Progressive. What does progressive suggest to you?
And harder and harder.
More and more, worse and worse, harder and harder, whatever it is. But you tie that word to deterioration. Progressive deterioration is like a flashing sign there. Getting bad. It's falling apart. All right, so let's look at those key words with burnout. Exhaustion. Now, I understand this is relative and subjective. And there's like threshold of pain. Maybe there's thresholds of exhaustion. We're going to find ourselves tired. I don't know if you've ever been, how tired you've been, how busy a week has been. But even in ministry, it can be this way, where you're just running back and forth. I remember one time I was preaching on a Sunday night, and it was the opening prayer, and I fell asleep during the prayer. I'm fixing to preach. You know, there's a little energy going on. You're a little nervous, you know, but I was so tired I just fell asleep. It can happen that we're exhausted. Number 2 is progressive. Now, here's a progression that can take place. It can go from fatigue to frustration to deterioration. A third key word, or words of those words, is collection of symptoms. And really the key word is symptoms, but we're talking about a collection of them. What kind of symptoms contribute to burnout? Physical symptoms. We'll talk about this more. Physically, I feel a certain way, and thus am at risk of burnout. Psychological. Lose my swagger, lose my confidence, begin to doubt myself. Third is emotional. I may find myself weeping, or I may find myself detached. And then behavioral. And then the fourth word is expectations. You saw those definitions: high, unrealistic. Right, so these are the kinds of concepts and words that we're looking for to determine the difference between this normal discouragement and burnout. And the reason I deal with that is a lot of preachers burn out. I don't know if we keep up with those kind of statistics here. I'm a preacher's kid. 2 times my dad suffered burnout. It was situations a lot of preachers don't face. But one time it was a highly successful work. They had gone from a church of about 15 or 20, we're well over 100. My dad did a lot of domestic missions. And in 1979, in the middle of a great work, my dad made what turned out, I suppose, in the time and the place in which he lived, to be a mistake. He baptized a black woman. And she was coming to church. The members came and said, you need to tell Sister Perry she needs to go to church down the road. And I said, why? well, they beat around the bush, but that congregation down the road, guess what? Its members were primarily in color. So my dad said, if you want Sister Perry to go somewhere else, you tell her. Well, they didn't want to do that. They wanted Dad to do it. And so some of the ladies circulated a petition to get my dad released from his job. And it happened. Now, that's discouraging because these people, believe it or not, fundamentally pretty good people. But they had a pretty significant spiritual character flaw, didn't they? They didn't understand the gospel is for all. And as a result of that, Dad was blindsided by that part. But not only that, this was a thriving, growing work. And things were going well, and it just kind of cut the knees from under him. And so my dad got out of preaching for a little while. The hunger was so great, he got back in the pulpit. He was in a situation quite a few years later where it was a military congregation. And I don't know you guys, in certain military, sometimes this can happen. I don't know how many bird colonel he was, but he was a highly placed guy. Came in and had just come from Boston, where the Boston movement was beginning. This new hermeneutic business was just getting going. He came in and he started teaching it. And there were a couple of officers who were of the same mind. And so here's Dad saying, wait a minute, guys, the Bible is inspired. It's not just a book of love letters. It's truth that's objective, and it's for us too. And unfortunately, there was a little bit of blindness to the rank of some of these men. It caused trouble, and there were some casualties in that. My dad was one of the casualties in that. Thankfully, and time gives us the benefit of this, that colonel is now a faithful, not just a member, but faithful preacher in the church. I don't know what happened to the second lieutenant who was highly involved in that. Another man who was a captain is now a faithful member of the church in the West, who went to train to preach in a very sound school of preaching. But at the time, they were on the other side of this thing. And my dad hurt from that, and so he got out and supported himself for a while. So it can happen, it can come, but I want to tell you, my dad's 69, you know what he's doing right now? Full time? He's preaching. It's a wonderful life. But burnout will come. We have to recognize it. I'm not so sure that I get the benefit of seeing the things that he went through that maybe he couldn't recognize by looking at his dad, who wasn't even a faithful member of the church. All right, let's look at some personality characteristics of burnout. These are the personal characteristics of those who may be more likely to burn out. And we'll look at three areas. The first area is personal motivations. Those who are prone to burnout are those whose personal motivations are or include things like this. Number one, a need to fulfill others' expectations of me. If I am driven by what I believe or I'm told that others expect of me or want from me, I am of a type that may be susceptible to burnout. You know what's really frustrating sometimes? It's somebody from the past. That may be a voice inside your head, expectations of somebody who's not even currently in your life. It could be a parent. It could be a teacher from elementary school. It could be, who knows who. Somebody who set out for you a set of expectations that you're trying to fulfill. Not God, some person. That could be the motivation of the need to rule and control others. Some people are micromanagers at heart, and they need to be in control of every little thing. And when one's motivated by the need to control, one is inevitably going to face the problem of burnout. Another motivational issue that can lead to burnout is having vague goals and directions. Remember that directionlessness that leads to difficulty in the local work? If I don't know where I'm going, in my family life, in my work life, or personally, I'm going to be prone to burnout. And another motivation that can cause burnout is the need to achieve, to be successful. If I'm not preaching for a big church,
if I'm not an author, if I'm not on the speaking circuit or whatever it is, if I'm not baptizing 50 people a year and known as a great soul winner, then I'm nothing. I'm not a success. Those individuals are prone toward burnout. So what does Paul say in Philippians 1? He tells us he shows us through the examples that we need to check our motivation. Why am I preaching? And we hear that, but in the day by day, if we don't watch why it is we're doing what we're doing, and we're driven by something less noble, then we set ourselves up for burnout. Number 2, those who have certain personal needs may find themselves prone to burnout. What are some personal needs that we might have that might lead us into a burnout situation?
Praise.
Okay, all right, something like the need to be approved or appreciated. I need to be stroked. I need to be told, attaboy. I need somebody to tell me, oh, you're great, you're wonderful. I don't know how you quantify that. How many guys are going into preaching for that reason? I don't know. There are some who seem driven by the need. They get validation.
Amen.
Do that. Huh?
Brothers who don't get the amen, they give up.
That's right. That's right. Hey, I retired from that business, brother. I'm done. That's right. You don't get the amen. That was a rebuke, wasn't it? I feel also, number 2, how about the need to achieve and succeed? If that's what drives me, I need that. Trying to boost my self-esteem, but when that achievement doesn't come, sometimes burnout's what follows. Everett Hufford has said that the cycle of achievement works this way, with somebody who is driven by those personal needs. Number 1 is the need to achieve. I need to succeed. I need to achieve something. Number 2, work hard to achieve. So I need to achieve, and then I set myself to work. Work hard to achieve, to be a success. Number 3, neglect of family and others. On the road to achieving this thing, family, other relationships are sloughed off. I'm so focused on it that I block that out. Number 4 is fatigue. You just can't do that indefinitely. At some point, you just get tired. So need to achieve, work hard to achieve, neglect relationships, fatigue. Number 5 is less satisfaction. This isn't as wonderful as I thought it was going to be. Number 6 is lower self-esteem. I'm a failure. We call it a cycle because it starts over again. Number 7 is the need to achieve.
Or 6.
The 6 was lower self-esteem. I'm piling at this, and I'm trying so hard. This is what I want, and it's not working, so I'm a failure. I'm no good. I can't do this. And that drives you right back into the cycle. I need to achieve something. Another personal need that can drive us to burnout is the need to control and have power over others. So there are personal motivations that can lead us to burnout. There are personal needs that can lead us to burnout. There's also a personal style that can lead us to burnout. One style that leads to burnout is being rigid and inflexible. Guys, we understand, don't we? The gospel can't change. There are some people who let their personal scruples and their personal opinions about certain things become gospel and law. And because of this, they are unwilling to bend. That's not Paul. And I think a guy, I have a lot of preachers in my family. I have an uncle who is just like this. And he's burned out several times. He has had low satisfaction preaching because it was just very rigid. I want to qualify what I'm saying is that you can have these convictions, but be careful in its application. For example, he believed it was wrong for his, he and his family, he didn't just believe it was wrong. He was an activist about TV. No TV in the house, nothing like that. Never, ever. And he was very rigid about that. And if you had any conversation with him, and you even owned a TV, you know, it was, you're less spiritual. You're not a good Christian. They did not believe in, and I realize I tread on thin ice because I'm not trying to tread on your convictions if you have any of these. But the secular, reasonable, non-materialistic, overboard observance of the Christmas holiday. He believed that was wrong. His daughters and his wife couldn't wear makeup. They had to, even if they're playing softball, they had to have on dresses. So these kinds of things. And it was rigid. And if you were on the other side of that, he didn't believe that one could listen to appropriate Christian singing outside of worship. And I respected that conviction, but he divided the church over it. There's a lot of things that are a little higher on the priority list than that. He's rigid. He was inflexible. He refused to bend. And he said, I haven't changed my view on anything in 30 years. He's proud of that. I don't know how you can study and be a student of the Word and not say, wait a minute, maybe I should look at this a little bit different. Now, I'm not saying we change truth. Truth can't change. But that inflexibility is no wonder that the man was prone to burnout. Another style is a lack of self-awareness. One who avoids inner feelings and needs. A lack of self-awareness. He avoids inner feelings, inner needs, inner motivations. A third style is one who projects an image at the expense of being real and human. The preacher image.
Hello, brethren. It's good to see you today. Glad to have you here. And I'm so thankful that you are a member where I preach.
And you ever seen somebody who's on all the time? That's got to be exhausting. And not being real. And not... That's how they tell the stories about the guys who cut their grass in a suit. Now, I think there have been guys who have reveled in that image. That is in itself a precursor to issues that are going to lead you to frustration and burnout. Be real. You can take that too far. Balance is the key, but we've got to make sure that we're not. We don't project that. We can think of guys like that, and it can be difficult. We'll stop there. We'll start with variables next time. Guys, I do spend a little time with this, and I don't want you to think that it's because the life in preaching is terrible. It's not. It's just that it is such a wonderful life, and you're so valuable to the kingdom. You need to know these things so you can avoid them and never have to go down that road in the first place. Let's have a word of prayer and then we'll dismiss. Father, thank you so much for these 5 men who are so valuable as tools in your hand. God, I'm so thankful for them and for their resilience and their demonstrated tenacity and continuing in this work that can be demanding and going through school. Please bless them, Father. Give them energy. Keep them healthy and strong and be with their families. And bless them, Father, as they prepare themselves for this most wonderful work in your kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen.